Barbara, can I just have a quick chat with you about the microphones? So we're going to go live streaming very soon. So this mic will be on, just so you know.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for coming to today's event. Rocking the System since 1973, the EU and Ireland working together for gender equality. We decided to hold this event 1 week out from International Women's Day so that we weren't in the competition next week to fit our event in. And we wanted to take stock really of progress on gender equality since Ireland joined the EC 50 years ago. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Barbara Nolan. I'm head of the representation here in Ireland. This is my second time coming back. Those who thought they'd seen the back of me have now got to look at me again. And I'm chairing today's discussion. Our online audience, hello online audience, you can submit your questions to the panel on slido.com using the code that we sent out in the event description on YouTube. So we have a stellar panel, which I'd like to welcome and introduce. We have Roderic O'Gorman, Minister for Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, the longest title in the world. And we're delighted to have you today, Minister. I know you have a busy schedule. We have beside me Ivana Bacik, who's the leader of the Labour Party, and Cathaoirleach of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Gender Equality. And we have my former big boss in the European Commission, Dr. Catherine Day, Chair of the Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality and former Secretary General of the European Commission. So I'm just going to say a few words of introduction to today's theme, and then I will hand over immediately to our speakers. So, I think we know that the European Union is a global leader in gender equality through its robust equal treatment legislation and efforts to mainstream the gender perspective into different policy areas. The EU has stimulated significant progress in gender equality in Ireland and in other EU countries. We have adopted 6 directives covering equality between women and men in the workplace, in self-employment, in access to goods and services, in social security, in pregnancy and maternity, and on issues such as family-related leave, flexible working arrangements for parents and carers. So together, this body of legislation has progressively set the legal standard across Europe and beyond in ensuring a broad protection from discrimination and the promotion of gender equality more widely. And many of you, the lawyers in the audience, and I know we have Karen Banks here, former Deputy Director General of the Commission's Legal Service, know that this has been further strengthened by the European Court of Justice with many different rulings, which has enlarged in a way the interpretation of EU legislation. So we have also, excuse me a moment, we have now, of course, this bedrock of legislation on equal pay, equal treatment, and this was the priority, if you like, during the 70s and 80s when Ireland was a relatively new member state. Equal pay and equal treatment was the key thing. And, getting rid of the notorious marriage bar, and I have to mention it because it's etched in many people's minds in the public service, which deprived so many women of their right to work, earn a living, and be financially independent, was but one of the key changes that we brought about as a result of EU membership, a very key one for those women, especially those working in the public service. And I think we owe a debt of gratitude to women's groups here in Ireland who are actively lobbying for change before Ireland's accession to the EC, and who held the government to account in the years after accession. So while much has been achieved, we're still in the process of building and doing more. And we have a current EU gender equality strategy, 2020 to 2025, which includes ending gender-based violence, closing gender gaps in the labour market, achieving equal participation across different sectors of the economy, achieving gender balance in decision-making and politics, and challenging gender stereotypes. And next week, on International Women's Day, the Commission will launch a communication campaign on challenging gender stereotypes. So in the title of our event, of course, is a reference to President Mary Robinson's 1990 speech, in which she noted that she was elected by Monona Heron, who instead of rocking the cradle, rocked the system. And some of you may have noticed that President von der Leyen quoted that during her speech recently to the joint houses of the Oireachtas. And I think, while we all know that Mary Robinson's election was a milestone, we still have a way to go to achieve true gender equality. And just to cite one example, the European Institute for Gender Equality identifies political decision-making as the area where there is most room for improvement in Ireland, as Ireland ranks only 18th of 27 member states in this regard. So last year, our International Women's Day event was Women on Boards, where Frances Fitzgerald, who is another, I think, great worker for gender equality, spoke very eloquently. And it's great to see that there was significant progress subsequently in that area. After 10 years of negotiation, the Directive on Gender Balance in Corporate Boards was finally adopted last November. Its aim is to ensure a transparent selection process of corporate board members based on clear criteria and a comparison of candidates' qualifications. For the first time, Ireland has exceeded the EU average for the proportion of women on the largest listed company boards by 1.6 percentage points. Not huge, but nonetheless an advance. The gap between Ireland and the EU has narrowed each year since the Balance for Better Business Group was established by the government in 2018. In general, however, progress with regard to gender equality can be slow, and that is why the Oireachtas resolution to establish the Citizens' Assembly in 2019 and the work of the Assembly and the Oireachtas Committee is so important. And that's what we're going to hear about now. First, we'll hear from Catherine Day, who will speak about the work of the Citizens' Assembly on gender equality. Then we'll have Ivana Bacik, who will discuss the response of the Oireachtas Committee on gender equality to the Citizens' Assembly recommendations. And finally, Minister O'Gorman will provide the government's perspective on the committee's recommendations and how these could be taken forward. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Catherine to kick off the proceedings. And of course, there will be some time for questions at the end of our speakers' presentations. Thank you. Catherine.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today to talk to you in very summary form about the recent Citizens' Assembly on gender equality. I want to start by making a general point. I believe that citizens' assemblies have proved very useful in the Irish context in dealing with difficult social issues. On marriage equality and on abortion, they have led to major steps forward, perhaps in a way that the political level didn't appreciate when they asked for the issues to be discussed in a citizens' assembly. And I think showing that, for example, opinion polls do not go deeply enough to really adequately reflect the mood of the country, whereas citizens' assemblies certainly do. And it's interesting to see that Ireland is now developing quite a reputation internationally for using this form of consulting citizens on issues that subsequently will find their way into general policy. for me, the value of a citizens' assembly is that you take a representative group of people, normally 50-50 men, women from all parts of Ireland, different income levels, and they take the time and they have factual information about the subjects that they're talking about. They hear from advocacy groups, and then they discuss among themselves, and they have time to make up their minds. And it was fascinating for me to see how views changed during the process, but also fascinating that what actually emerges is, I think, on the whole, a very reasonable, well-reflected set of views, which the political level can then base itself on with some confidence in making sound public policy for the future. And another interesting point, because at the time that those two previous assemblies dealt with these political hot potatoes, there was a lot of commentary that, oh, who were these people? And this was only a group of 100 people. And, what was their role? But when the votes were counted in the two referenda, one on marriage equality and one on abortion, they almost exactly mirrored the votes in the citizens' assemblies. So I think that's a very clear way of indicating how representative such groups were, and I hope will continue to be in the future. Maybe also important to say at the outset that citizens' assemblies are purely consultative. Nobody gives them the power to change anything. They are set up on the basis of a resolution from the Dáil and the Seanad, from the two houses of the Oireachtas, and they're asked to make recommendations. But they have no power other than the power of persuasion, which I think can be very strong when it's well informed. So the one which I chaired sat between January 2020 and April 2021. It was quite complicated in several ways, in that we had a complicated resolution from the Oireachtas. They didn't just ask the Assembly to look at gender equality, they asked it to look at general issues like how to achieve women's full and effective participation for leadership. I think lots of people will have views on that, but also asked them to scrutinise structural pay inequalities, which is not easy for citizens who are not usually involved in policy or lawmaking in their daily lives. And the second complication was that we had to run most of the Assembly during COVID, so it had to move online, hadn't been done before in Ireland. But I really want to pay tribute to the members of that Assembly who accepted to work online. And they did it because they wanted to make a difference for their children and their grandchildren. They wanted to be part of a process of changing Ireland to be a better place for everyone to live in. And when they were finished their work, they wrote an open letter to the Oireachtas. And in it, they said that they had, and I'm going to quote from it now, they said, "We listened, we learned and reflected. Our views were deepened and at times challenged." And they finished up by saying that they wanted to give the Oireachtas a new view on a future Ireland where gender equality is the norm. So no less than that. That was the outcome of their work. And at the beginning, I think there was a very strong feeling that in particular the progress on women's rights had stalled in Ireland over the previous 10 years. After quite a bit of progress in fits and starts, things had slowed down. And there was a strong determination on the part of the members of the Assembly not to put up with the slow pace of change, but to call for faster change. And what they've actually asked for is quite a big agenda for social change in Ireland, going from better pay and conditions for those who care for us, taking a better choice for those who need care into account, better childcare that takes real account of the needs of parents, as well as many recommendations on improving the situation of women. And the calls that they are making for change would benefit men and women equally. It would benefit the whole of our society. But if you look at all of the recommendations taken together, it is a strong call for social change in the future. The Assembly generated over 500 recommendations, and then gradually through a process of discussion, we whittled them down to 45, which are very clearly worded calls for action. And I don't have a lot of time today, so I'm just going to summarise some of them. First of all, there's a call to change our constitution in 3 ways. The first is to add an explicit reference to gender equality and non-discrimination. That's far from revolutionary. Over 80% of the world's constitutions already have it, so we would do well to add it into ours. Secondly, to delete the infamous woman in the home clause, written in 1937 in a very different Ireland from the Ireland we live in today. I think the deletion of that clause is not really an issue today, but its replacement, and the citizens want it replaced by language that is not gender specific, but which obliges the state to take reasonable measures to support care within the home and wider community. And that's would be a big change if we can make it happen. And the third thing, which a lot of the members of the Assembly didn't know, is that our Constitution provides protection for the married family, but not for other families. And again, we all know the family makeup in Ireland is very different today than it was in 1937. So there are lots of recommendations on care, I think brought out not only from the fact that we were meeting during COVID, but also from the fact that almost every member of the Assembly has some personal experience of care, either receiving it or giving it. So everybody felt things could be improved there. There are several important recommendations on leadership in politics and public life and the workplace, which go to the membership of boards that Barbara was talking about. But also the members are very strongly in favour of quotas for national elections, for European Parliament elections, penalties for parties that don't meet the gender quotas, quotas for cultural, sports and media organisations. And again, they were quite surprised to see the low levels of women on so many boards in all of these organisations that make up the social fabric of the country. There were 5 recommendations on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. And I'm happy to say that all 5 have already been taken by Helen McEntee into the new strategy against domestic and gender-based violence. And a number of other elements of recommendations have already been taken up, but I don't want to trespass on what the other speakers are going to say. Maybe as a final remark, just to say that the citizens were sometimes surprised to see where Ireland stands in comparison to other EU member states. For example, they felt that maybe they felt coming in that Ireland was a progressive country, but then they were quite surprised to learn that we're still very low in terms of female representation in the Dáil, only 23%. Barbara gave the figure for the European ranking where we are 18th, but actually we're ranked about 100th in the world. So we are very far behind most other countries. Obviously, the extent to which Ireland has contracted out the private sector childcare, the cost of childcare, and the inflexibility of the hours for which childcare can be provided was a big issue. The low comparative level of there was a focus on to get those comparisons. I was a bit upset to see that they weren't always aware how much of the change that has come here has come from and continues to come from European legislation. So I think we still have a bit to do there. But they were very keen to the top tier of EU member states. Response Minister. I think our citizens, because Ivana chairing, went to some trouble to keep the citizens involved, to do a kind of after-sales service so that they would see where their work was going. And I think that's also very important in terms of citizen engagement. Ivana chaired it, and by saying that the last meeting of the committee where Ivana presented their report, it was quite moving for a lot of organisations who were there. They felt at last somebody again is looking forward. So it's now up to the government to see what they do with the recommendations, indicate how they will take them to be. So thank you very much.
Barbara, and thank you for the year. And it's timely to be Parliament to recall, or the European Parliament representatives had, as you've said, and as Catherine has said, in shaping Irish equality policy. I'm thinking back to Simone Veil as the early president had in shaping EU equality policy. And it was interesting to hear unexpected, but evidence really of the high level. Barbara and Catherine, who've blazed a trail clearly. Could I just say it's also a pleasure to be here on a panel. Gorman won't mind being in a minority for once, because when I was first elected, to having a quote elected to this Dáil out of 160. So it's really a very poor representation of each gender. So we hope to see an increase, but it is a long time coming. Politics, which led to the adoption of the quota law. And we identified 5 care and old boys culture. Those 4 C's are across all different candidate selection. That are preliminary remarks, and I won't take too long, because I know we want to hear the government's response. But just to say that Catherine has given you a really assemblies and you know which and the Citizens' Assembly themselves, this model comes out of the Constitutional Convention on Marriage Equality, on the repeal of the 8th Amendment, on biodiversity, on mayoral elections. We've seen them doing really important work. They are indeed a model now. I do want to pay tribute to diligent and so committed to their work. As the chair of the Oireachtas. So we worked on a cross-party basis. We held 9 months of hearings over the course of last Equal Ireland, our democratic social change, not just to achieve gender equality, because there's a recognition of intersectional issues here, of disability, of ethnicity, of sexual. We were mindful of that when we were with different NGOs and experts and others. We heard lived experiences of those affected by inequality issues. We had great collaboration and support from civil society, from government departments, and it's very useful for us to debate it. That we would take those 45 recommendations, how to see them implemented. So it's a very practical set of measures we have set out around the care proposals. For example, we've called on government to introduce a national unit for care planning, because one thing really struck us from all of the different people who spoke with us is how difficult it is to get really reliable data on caring, on who's carrying out care, who's being cared for in Ireland. So that was one area. Education, we have a range of recommendations on political leadership and so on. I do just want to finish though by saying that perhaps the most recommendations that Catherine spoke about related to constitutional change. And I think a really important achievement of our committee was that we devised a set of wordings to be put to the people by way of referendum, equality clause in the Constitution, the deletion of the sexist language, and in a much more complicated way, the insertion of language recognising and valuing care, and finally the insertion of language recognising that more inclusive put it to the Taoiseach yesterday that we need a particular priority of government. I know Minister Attorney General, because that gives an important impetus for change when we can come up with a wording that is cross-party, cross-civil society. We all of us, all of the members, the TDs and senators who were on the committee, are very committed to seeing these recommendations implemented. We did give credit where government had already started recommendations of citizens' assemblies. We all want to achieve that more gender equal society.
I know it's one of a number of events it's holding in 2020, alluding to the comments in President Robinson's acceptance of issues. The European Union in 1973, women in Ireland faced discrimination not only in terms of the labour market, more deeply ingrained structural inequality that was embedded in all of the states. Accession to the EEC has meant we've had to tell the women's movement here in Ireland. And I think since then, obviously, we've seen, mid-1990s, the Convention on the Constitution in 2012 and the first Citizens' Assembly then in 2016 on gender equality as the next step in advancing equality between who make gender equality. There has to be a broad and there has to be an inclusive approach, and the programme for government. It has taken us some time to take this committee was set up. I'd really like to recognise both Catherine and they've done. I had the opportunity to come into saying I think bodies have given very detailed consideration to the issues to the issues involved, and I think they've recognised the centrality of the issues. Responding to the committee's report is very much in our agenda for this year, and we intend to do so in a structured way, but also I think importantly in a meaningful way. Missions of some committee. So maybe just to, I suppose, speak briefly about some of that work that's ongoing at the moment. As Ivana and Catherine both said, there has been a very its importance in Irish society, and in terms of my own department's work, obviously we've very much focused on the issue of childcare. And those early years, we've been able to do something significant from January this year in terms of a very substantial cut in those fees that we recognise are still too high, but a 25% cut has for many parents. But in terms of our wider investment across that, to recognise the private business elements there, but healthcare professionals, 98% of whom are women, and we were able to secure the first time ever a pay agreement for that sector of childcare professionals. I think that was a really important point in that particular sector. We also look at and obviously those measures support families, they support children, but they particularly support women. And I think particularly allowing parents to spend more time with their children in those early years, and we're providing parent introduced in 19 where the child has a disability or a long-term illness. In terms of additional paid leaves, as you know, we've been able to significantly increase parents' leave and parents' benefit in the lifetime of this government. When this government began, it was 2 weeks paid leave. Now it's up to 7 weeks paid leave. And again, that's significant. And again, in terms of recognising, the importance of supporting both mums and dads, we're very clear that this leave can't be transferred to either parent. It must be taken individually by discussion about that, but we felt it was important in terms of supporting, as I said, both mums and dads in terms of their caring role. The work-life balance bill through the houses at the moment. We'll hopefully be finishing in the for example, the introduction of 5 days unpaid leave for serious medical illnesses for a carer, and also the introduction of flexible work for parents and for carers. But the bill we're bringing through does a number of other important things as well. The extension of breastfeeding breaks, for example, as you know, since 2006, women returning from work after pregnancy, by and large, any woman who takes a full maternity leave, that 6 months is gone. So the right was there on paper, but was never really realizable. So this legislation is extending the right to take breastfeeding breaks from 6 months up to actually a very significant benefit for a lot of women returning from work. And obviously then there's the introduction of paid domestic violence leave as well, which is significant in terms of the DSGBV agenda that others referred to. And I think we all know that difficulties in terms of reconciling work and family life for both men and women are introduction of the gender pay gap, the gender pay gaps that exist across firms. The department has a gender pay gap in favour of women, as it turns out. We're the only government department to have that at the moment, and it's Assistant Secretary of Data, and I think that's particularly important. I think also in terms of racial equality, systematic groups. So it's going to provide a common framework across government for the collection and indeed the sharing of disaggregated equality data. And I think again we'll be looking at getting influence from actions that have taken place across EU partners, looking at the European Handbook on Equality Data, and I know we've also received some input from Oireachtas, the Human Rights and Equality Commission as well. So I think that will allow us again be better informed in terms of what is happening, and allow us to better shape policy responses, knowing that we are responding to particular issues that have been identified through a better collection of data. So that's just, I suppose, a broad outline of some of the key equality measures that are being worked on within my department right now. Some of them are direct responses to elements of both the report of the Assembly and of the special Oireachtas committee. Some of them were in train already, but I think all are highly relevant to the work that we're all seeking to advance in terms of improving gender equality in our country. Thanks very much.
So thank you very much to all the speakers for their excellent contribution. Even now, 20 minutes for questions. Minister Gorman, I know, has to leave maybe 10 minutes early. For those of you, you can continue to submit questions on Slido. You want to raise your hand, I would ask you to provide your name and your organisation if relevant. Before I open the question, start the ball rolling. Panel. The Citizens' Assembly model has been used in Ireland and has been cited as best practice, if you like, to bring about letting elected representatives like yourself, Ivana, and the Minister off the hook in terms of, pursuing this through the parliamentary process, first and foremost. So who would like to kick off? Maybe Minister.
Been extremely beneficial, and I think it's allowed us as a society tackle questions that sometimes think we have to be maybe and that can be the case, and that can be a barrier towards social change. And if we can find another way, difficult decisions, I think that's a good thing. I think particularly in the area of repeat the Citizens' Assembly, which then filtered into a joint Oireachtas committee, who would have been assumed to take very traditional, I don't want to say backward, but very traditional views, change the joint Oireachtas committee. And I think that gave the space for people to think about things differently. And, the political system, I think it always works, but sometimes it works very slowly. And if we can find a mechanism that kickstarts a debate, that brings everyone to a space where they're more comfortable in terms of, taking the next step in leadership, I think that's something that's really good. I think the only thing is when the Citizens' Assembly is given a very detailed, like one question, repeal or not repeal, marriage equality or not. Yeah. I think when it's very detailed, it becomes harder and I suppose you have a very wide range of very diverse recommendations, and how do you ensure all of them get, and there's a challenge there. That would be not a negative, but just, I suppose, a kind of that there are limits to what it can do.
I've been seeing some discussion in the media recently about, is a citizens' assembly in some way negative as regards representative democracy? And I don't think so at all, because, as I said, it's purely consultative. I do think it has tried to kick the can down the road by sending it to a citizens' assembly, but it's a boomerang. And if you ask 100 citizens and you spend their views, their unambiguous views, it's a bit difficult then, not to take them into account in some way or another. So I see it as a contribution to democracy, and I agree with the Minister. I think it can be a way of accelerating change, or maybe giving not courage to the political level, but telling them that people are a very busy world where few of us have time to immerse ourselves in the details of complex issues, of asking a representative group of citizens to do that work for us and then come back and tell us their views. And as always,
I think that's a new description of a citizens' assembly. Two quick points I'd make in addition, but I agree with the others. First, that the real strength within a citizens' assembly model is the facility it gives for calm, evidence-based discussion and the presentation of information away from the soundbite. And in an era of social media, that's an enormous value that the citizens' assembly model has, and I've seen it work, as we all have. And the second thing is, it should never, of course, never replace the elected decision-making bodies under the Constitution, in particular the Oireachtas. But it doesn't, because the Oireachtas creates a citizens' assembly. It's the Oireachtas that set terms of reference. It comes back to the Oireachtas through and the committee process we've now set up, I think, is a good way of ensuring legislators continue to engage directly with the assembly. The most recent example, of course, is the new assembly on drug policy, and there again is our knowledge about drug policy will really be enriched by the ability to have a citizens' assembly on this complex area, and I think it'll really help and assist those of us in the Oireachtas and indeed in government on how we move forward on drug policy.
Thank you. Now, I saw this the Finnish ambassador's arm up here. Can I get the
Thank you, Barbara. So, Roderic, I'm the Finnish ambassador. Thank you, Barbara, for inviting us here. Of course, the EU from 70s, the very fundamental decision, Defren and Sabine, on the equal pay on air hostesses, when everybody thought that the EU is not doing anything for women's rights. So it is doing a lot, has been doing a lot. And I agree with Catherine that it's important to share lessons that we have all gone through amongst our partners within the EU and women in the political decision making at all levels, including up to the parliament, and to have equal access, meaning issues. But regarding the have at the next election, a big challenge, one and the ministry. How your thoughts on how women accepted and coming in forefront, including thinking of that parties are in the elections to win, and you have safe seats. And what are your campaigns?
We never have safe seats in politics.
Never heard
I
of
think
safe
we're,
seats. Don't know what that is.
It needs a lot of thinking in how to reconcile winning elections and actually going with this very high level quota, 40%. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to suggest we take a couple of questions together and come back.
Just back at the end.
Yes, and for our online audience who maybe didn't hear the question, it was related to how will we achieve the 40% quota that is envisaged for female candidates for the next election. So now I have the Belgian ambassador, and then I'm going to move to, there's a lady behind here who's been asking. Yeah.
Yes, I'm Kara, I'm the Belgian ambassador, and I had kind of the same question as my Finnish colleague, because when I arrived here about 2 years ago, so I was really impressed before coming by the number, by the equality, for instance, in the diplomatic Irish service. So I was really surprised to see that only 23% of TDs were female. And you have been elaborating on the 5 Cs, and I think as was really saying, that maybe one of the most difficult ones to tackle is the candidate selection. And in Belgium, we also send a female parliamentarians when we are composing the lists. So maybe that could be an idea. What's the willingness? What the big problem is that we need more female
representatives.
Just unfortunately, the minister has to leave shortly, so I'm going to give him a chance to
Thanks,
come in
thanks,
again
thanks,
before he
Barbara.
leaves. Yeah,
Just,
thank
I'm
you.
going to chair the national steering group of the LGBT plus steering implementation group for the national policy there. So it's for an equality related reason that I'm leaving. It's going to be a big challenge, the 40%. I was chair of my party for 8 years, so I would have been very much involved with our candidate selection processes across a number of local, European and general elections. We in the Greens made a commitment to put the 40% in place for the local elections in 2019, and we got it. I think we got about 42% running. And we actually got 40% of our candidates elected. Our candidates who were elected were women. And in terms of co-option now, growing that, so that's going to be a big benefit for us, both in terms of the local elections candidates already in the first tier of us. It will be a big challenge for but they will also find that they will get brilliant candidates as well, and that ultimately will prove the type of politicians that all parties bring forward, and I think that's certainly been our experience. Barbara, I'm really sorry now that I have to put out. Listen, thank you all very much. Lovely to be here today. Thank you.
Interventions to say, as a party leader, obviously I'm very conscious of the challenge, as Roderic has said, about meeting our quota, although in Labour we've had a voluntary quota anyway. So I should say that the legislation we introduced in 2012, following from my committee's report, was modelled on the Belgian Smet-Tobax law. And in 1990, Ireland and Belgium had roughly similar levels of women's representation in Parliament, had seen huge increase in the numbers of women, really significant increase in politics. So we were modelling on that. And we also include a very significant sanction. So a party that doesn't meet the quota loses 50% of its state funding. So let's put it that way. I think every party will meet the quota.
So let's, there was a lady here who asked some time ago, can we have the mic over here? And we'll take a group of questions, if that's okay. Yeah.
Yes, I think my questions are for the minister, but I'm Karen Kiernan from One Family. We were set up as Cherish 50 years ago, and we really were delighted to see coming through the Citizens' Assembly and then the committee the recommendation for equality for all families. And I suppose it's just to encourage affected and the kind of symbolic reparation that can happen. They're old and they're dying, and we've lost a number of our founders who really, really would like this to happen. And I know many people who have been brought up in institutions. So just to say that. And then the other thing is the parents' benefit, which is very welcome. It's from the European Union in relation to gender equality for parents. But unfortunately, the way it's been implemented in Ireland, it discriminates against babies in one-parent families. So we would really hope that Ireland will remedy that and not have gender equality override children's rights. Thank you.
Thank you. And I mean, I hope, I see one at the back. Oh, you're ready. Go. Yeah.
Thank you. Teresa Healy from Early Childhood Ireland, and thank you again to the Commission for the invitation to be here today. And just, I probably don't need to remind anybody in the room that there can be sometimes a tension between something that is good for a working family and something that solidifies children's rights and the right to a very quality experience in whomever's home or whatever place that they're being looked after. Sometimes you hear calls for services to be open at 6:30 in the morning until 8 and 9 and 10 at night. So we really have to keep to the forefront of our mind in the middle of all of these discussions about what's in the best interest of children as well. So thank you.
Okay. Sorry, there was just a lady at the back and then you. Is that okay? Yeah, thank you.
Hi, sorry, I can't see.
Yeah, thank you.
Siobhan McKenna, I'm the head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the Public Appointment Service. So
have you got your microphone on?
Yeah. So I work for part of government that does recruitment for the civil and public sector. And so we just done a big project with EuroSI where we've crunched a lot of application data to see who's actually applying for the civil service and who isn't. And I'll just say that there's very clear vertical and horizontal gender segregation in our civil service still. But that's actually not the point I was making. I wanted to say that to the minister. But my concern is, and didn't come up with the 5 C's, I don't think, is what women in the public eye face. And we've seen Nicola step down, we've seen Jacinda step down. my first cousin was in Justin Trudeau's cabinet in Catherine McKenna. She stepped down, she couldn't take anymore. She's one of the toughest people I know. So I'm just wondering about the next generation of women coming through, how it becomes less toxic, how you become less toxic, the whole public debate and putting yourself out there. And as a woman of colour, I can tell you, it's 10 times worse before putting myself out there and knowing the stuff that you have to take. So I'm just wondering, how you cope in your own careers, but also kind of advice to those of us who kind of are watching the next generation coming through and trying to encourage them to step up and step forward in public life.
Okay, I think we've several issues there. There was children's rights. There was one families, the urgency of the referendum, and also obviously this issue of women in public life getting a lot of abuse.
Okay, I'm happy to take that first. Karen, first, just to say huge thanks to you and One Family, and indeed to the National Women's Council and Akidwa and Early Childhood Ireland and Family Carers and all of the NGOs who engaged so strongly with us on the Gender Equality Committee. And I know they'd also engaged with the Citizens Assembly. So I know Catherine will want to say that as well. It was really important for us to hear direct experience of the people, of those working in the field, those who are living the discriminations and so on. And I was glad to celebrate the 50th anniversary recently with One Family. But you're quite right. We do need that referendum very soon, and we need to ensure that there is that recognition of the inclusive definition of family. There's a case currently on appeal before the Supreme Court, the Johnny O'Mara case, which illustrates the real injustice of the lack of recognition for single parent or non-marital families, and that illustrates an urgency to this. That's why we keep pressing on that. And, I was heartened that Taoiseach gave me an assurance yesterday, as I say, this is a priority and that the Attorney General is now examining our wording. Teresa, thank you for that. And, best interest of child, that's always uppermost in our minds too. And clearly, the current ad hoc piecemeal model of childcare provision is failing children more than anyone else. That's the most important thing, is that some children are getting a much better start, much better early years education than others. Some children are getting none. So we've called for the sort of Niamh Brannach vision for early years, that it should be free and accessible to all children equally. So that's at the heart of the Citizens Assembly report and our own report too. And indeed, Karen raised a very specific point about benefits, and that's a very important one in terms of single parents. Could I just finish by thanking you, Siobhan, for raising that point about online abuse? And we could be here all day, but I won't. So it has been suggested to me actually that since we did that report, we should have added a 6th C, cyberbullying, because it is such an issue. And certainly as somebody who's traveling the country looking to recruit more women specifically to run, obviously for my party, for Labour, to join us to run. For us, we have a Sign Up a Sister month going on in March, if anyone's interested. But it does come back constantly to me, especially from younger women who've seen the levels of abuse we get. And I'm in politics a long time. I came into politics as a student activist. I was threatened with jail. We thought we were going to jail for giving information on abortion. Mary Robinson, who you may have heard of, our lawyer, told, before she was president, told us to pack our bags. So we were used to being spat at on the street, to being physically threatened, physically hit on some occasions, because abortion was at that point such a divisive issue, and we were clearly, those of us who are pro-choice, in such a tiny minority. Now the things have changed completely on that, but sadly at the moment we're seeing some of our public reps, and I know it's not just Labour, but some public reps who are being targeted hideously online and in real life over support for refugees. So the ethnicity issue is huge at the moment, and refugee issue has unfortunately generated a lot more of this online abuse. So again, the Citizens Assembly came up with some really clear recommendations on better regulation of social media. That's a huge thing. We're seeing private Facebook groups whipping up hatred in communities, not just against women, obviously. This is really pernicious. And our experience as a political party going to Facebook saying, take down this, you are causing hate, you are causing incidents of abuse against our representatives, but also against really vulnerable communities. They're not engaging. So, I've spoken directly with Minister Catherine Martin. She has brought in, as you'll know, the online media regulation bill. There's a new commission due to be set up. So it is all now, we are now seeing a framework being put in place to regulate social media better, to give more remedies, to ensure speedier action. But, I think all of us are just conscious that as long as anonymous posting is facilitated, this is going to continue. And it is difficult to recruit more women in that circumstance, no doubt about it. At the same time, we have to rise above it, we have to challenge it, and we in Labour brought forward the COCO's law to bring in criminal sanctions for online abuse and trolling, because we're conscious it's not just people in the public eye either, it's teenagers who are being trolled by their classmates, so this is a much bigger issue across society, but it certainly doesn't make life in the public eye any easier. We'll say that. But it's still worth running for election. Can I just add that? It's still worth it in the end, And we need to see more women in, because the bigger the number, the experience from Belgium and Finland and everywhere else is, the more women in public life, the more women in positions of leadership, the easier it becomes for all of us.
Catherine, yeah.
I don't really have anything to add, but I see Alison from Women for Election is there, and maybe she could come in on the training and the way that they help women to prepare themselves to face it. I mean, I think we have as a society, we have to fight all this hate. I think the European Union, for all its faults, is an organisation of countries that believe in equality, human rights, and a decent way of life. And I think that those of us in the somewhat silent majority do have to speak up and speak out now, because it is under threat. But I mean, the things I was abused about as a civil servant pale into insignificance compared to listening to the politicians. So, but I think Alison might have a useful comment to
Alison,
make.
please,
I'm Alison Carter, I'm chair of Women for Election, and we're an organisation that support mentoring and training women to get involved in politics. I mean, the good news is that we have hundreds and hundreds of women coming forward to work with us in preparation for the local elections in 2024 and the next general election, whenever that is. And as per media reports, it seems to be getting closer to please let us know, we like to be prepared. But what I would say is that we have a real challenge in this area, but we also have a huge opportunity to improve our politics in general. So there's no question that women coming forward into the public eye are experiencing enormous levels of abuse, as are men. And I think it's a huge opportunity to take this issue, to take it on proactively. We've met in the last week with both the Bacik and the Cathaoirleach, and I know there are moves afoot to put together a task force to address this issue, to address it in a very holistic way. So it's not just a question of issuing a grant to politicians to put barbed wire around their houses and cameras, and welcoming all of those issues are, that's important. But we need a much more holistic approach to this. So it's not just about the defensive piece of when somebody is attacked. It's going much back further down the chain with social media, but also the more conventional media and the discourse that we have around politics. But I think what we have to avoid is a situation where the people who are doing this, their aim is to keep women out of politics. This is an organised issue. It's not random, and it's not something that's happening by accident. We have to avoid a situation where women are taken offline, who step back from the political process and step back from that huge opportunity to engage with the electorate. It's an enormous issue, but it's also one, I think, that women that we deal with on a daily basis want to challenge. They want to come forward to join politics, to change their communities and to change the country. And that is positively involved in politics, as Ivana will testify to. And that's really where our eyes have to be on ensuring that we allow them the opportunity to achieve all of they want to achieve in the political sphere. The body politic legislation, whoever is acting in this space needs to come together to look at it in a broad basis. And as I say, we're working very closely with the RSP to hopefully make that happen. And if you do know of any women that you think need that tap on the shoulder, just say you'd be great, you'd be fantastic in our local government or international or nationally rather, please send them towards us, Women for Election.ie, and we're very happy to work with them and working forward to change that abysmal 23%.
Thank you, Alison. So there's a cry for recruitment here, open vacancies for everybody. So I think maybe one last question, because we need to wrap up. Thank you.
Last but not least, the travel community last.
Well, I didn't know that, but
Just to say, first comment, just a couple of things in relation to even the trolling with the females and politicians. Means that what I find in Ireland as a traveller woman, my whole lifetime I've been discriminated once and move on baby to go out the street. But when the likes of the last few years, just a general comment, this wasn't going to say first, but now I am. When politicians and people running for elections yourselves uses the traveller ethnicity hate campaign to get votes for presidential elections and TDs giving out all these comments,
When they're not sanctioned or they're not penalised, it'll come back because society will say, we pick and choose who we discriminate against. It's awful when any kind of discrimination, any kind of hate goes to an individual. But when the press and when TDs and when potential presidential election people are getting away with discriminating against us, the oldest ethnicity group in this country, everyone's fair game, right? So everyone needs to stand together in solidarity and make sure a discrimination against one person, no matter who it is, we mightn't agree, it's a discrimination against everyone. So while it's wrong, I just think over the last number of years happening right across the world. And also just to say with elections, this is my main point. Just two things. We're a very small minority in this country. Most of our employment is in community employment because we can't get employment in this country. And just I think that the political sector in this country needs to include people from the travelling community and get them in and informed, because going through the channels of people with all these canvass and things like that, we don't have much support. But I think the government body should have a space for traveller representation within the political arena so that the voices are heard. And if there's a choice between man and woman, pick a woman, please, if you don't mind. Really do a lot of things. And just any of the things Gormick was even, Roderic was saying, is just be conscious of when you're delivering maternity leave and things like that. When you're working in the community sector, and you have to take 26 weeks paid leave, it's only barely the minimum benefits you're getting. Some other sectors out there can get a top up. So if you have a mortgage and you have to go back to maybe 260 euro for maternity leave when you're having a baby, it's very, very hard. So I think that any policies should be conscious of the community sectors, where there's groups and organisations that cannot support the women who stay a long time in maternity, but also we can't afford to come out saying that I'm a grandmother. I am not having any more babies, so rest assured. But I'm just saying, for in future, we need to be more conscious and up from the 26 weeks for maternity pay and longer and proper pay for women that have to come out. But just be conscious, we are a minority within this country, and it'd be great to have political representation within our community. Thank you.
I don't know whether anybody wants to come in after that.
Except to wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah,
If
I
equality
think
means anything, it's equal treatment for everybody, not defined on who you are or where you come from, but that you have equal rights. And I do think we have a way to go in this country. And I think that the kind of equality that we're trying to work for is equality for everybody, no exceptions.
Here. And could I just add my own solidarity? And we did in fact recognise that the need for embedded quotas to recognise traveller and ethnicity and to ensure more representation in the Oireachtas for travellers as well. So that was an important point. Could I also just pay tribute, Alison, to the work that Women for Election are doing in bringing forward and mentoring women and supporting women to come forward? It's really important. I've been working with the Cathaoirleach on that task force on women in politics, on trying to tackle the abuse it's been directed against not just women but all public reps. And we also do have a women's caucus, which myself and Catherine Martin set up in the last Oireachtas, and that's been really positive as a force, gentle and positive note, as a force for ensuring more cooperation and collaboration among women of all parties and none in the Oireachtas, and that's been a really powerful mechanism too. And again, we're looking at other jurisdictions where we have these similar caucuses, women's caucuses that give a really good safe space within the Oireachtas for women to come together, and we found that a really powerful force for change as well.
Thank you very much. So I just to me now to thank the panelists for giving up their time today to join us. And I'd like to thank you, the audience, for your contributions to the discussion. I'd also like to thank we the people who are our new contractors. It's their first event together, who have helped to make the event possible. And thank you to my own team, particularly Joan and Nicola, who have both done excellent work to prepare the event. A recording will be available on our YouTube channel in case you or anyone you know would like to catch up. So thank you very much. We've started the Women's Day Fest. So, and I no doubt that you will be joining other events as the week goes on. So we're here first. Thank you very much.